Marcus Wellington had always prided himself on being predictable. Every morning at exactly 6:30, his driver would pick him up from his mansion in the exclusive Beacon Hills neighborhood. By 7:15, he would be at his office on the 42nd floor of the Wellington Financial Tower, coffee in hand, ready to tackle another day of managing his multi-million-dollar investment firm. Today was supposed to be no different. The meeting with the Japanese investors was scheduled for 2 o'clock, followed by a conference call with his London office at 4. His assistant, Patricia, had already confirmed his dinner reservation at Le Bernardin for 8:30 with his wife, Sarah. Everything was planned, organized, and under control, just the way Marcus liked it. But at 11:45 that Tuesday morning, everything changed. The call came from his personal doctor, Dr. Harrison Mitchell, a man Marcus had known since college. The tone in Harrison's voice was different, urgent, concerned, not the usual casual banter they shared during Marcus's quarterly checkups. "Marcus, I need you to come in immediately," Harrison said without his usual pleasantries. "The blood work from last week came back, and there are some irregularities we need to discuss right away." Marcus felt his stomach drop. At 45 years old, he had always maintained excellent health. He worked out with his personal trainer 3 times a week, ate organic meals prepared by his private chef, and had never smoked or abused alcohol. The idea that something could be seriously wrong had never crossed his mind. "What kind of irregularities?" Marcus asked, though part of him didn't want to know the answer. "I'd rather discuss this in person. Can you be here in an hour?" Marcus looked at his schedule, thinking about the Japanese investors, the London call, all the carefully orchestrated plans for the day. None of it seemed important anymore. "I'll be there in 30 minutes, he said. The drive to Dr. Mitchell's office felt like the longest 30 minutes of Marcus's life. His mind raced through possibilities, each scenario worse than the last. He tried to focus on the familiar sights of the city, the bustling sidewalks, the towering skyscrapers, the endless stream of yellow taxis, but nothing could distract him from the growing knot of anxiety in his chest. Dr. Mitchell's office was located in the prestigious Manhattan Medical Center, where only the city's elite received treatment. Marcus had been coming here for years, but today the familiar marble lobby and expensive artwork felt cold and intimidating. The consultation lasted 45 minutes. Dr. Mitchell spoke in medical terms that Marcus struggled to understand, but the bottom line was clear: the tests showed early signs of a serious condition that would require immediate lifestyle changes and ongoing monitoring. It wasn't life-threatening if caught early and managed properly, but it was serious enough to make Marcus reconsider everything about how he lived his life. Walking back to his car, Marcus felt like he was in a daze. The busy Manhattan street seemed surreal, as if he was watching a movie of someone else's life. People hurried past him, absorbed in their own worlds, completely unaware that his entire perspective had just shifted dramatically. Instead of returning to the office, Marcus called Patricia and told her to cancel all his appointments for the day. He needed time to process what he had learned, to figure out how to tell Sarah, to understand what this diagnosis meant for their future together. As his driver navigated through the afternoon traffic toward Beacon Hills, Marcus stared out the window and thought about his life. He had worked 16-hour days for the past 20 years, building his financial empire from nothing. His father had been a middle-class accountant, and Marcus had been determined to create something bigger, something that would last beyond his lifetime. But now, faced with his own mortality, he wondered if he had missed something important along the way. When was the last time he had really talked to Sarah about something other than their social calendar or his business deals? When had they last taken a vacation that wasn't interrupted by urgent phone calls from the office? When had he last simply enjoyed being home without thinking about the next deal, the next acquisition, the next million to be made? The Wellington mansion came into view as they turned onto Maple Drive. It was an impressive Georgian-style estate that Marcus had purchased 5 years earlier, complete with manicured gardens, a tennis court, and a swimming pool that overlooked the valley below. The house had been featured in Architectural Digest, and their neighbors included several Hollywood celebrities and tech moguls. It was beautiful, expensive, and perfect, everything Marcus thought he had wanted. But, as he looked at it now, it felt more like a museum than a home. His driver, Robert, had been with the family for 3 years. He was a quiet, professional man in his 50s who knew better than to make small talk unless Marcus initiated it. Today, however, Marcus found himself wanting to connect with someone, anyone, about what he was feeling. "Robert," Marcus said as they pulled into the circular driveway, "do you ever wonder if you're living the right life?" Robert glanced at him in the rearview mirror, clearly surprised by the personal question. After a moment, he said, "Mr. Wellington, I think most people wonder about that from time to time. The lucky ones get a chance to change course if they need to." Marcus nodded, appreciating the thoughtful response. "Thank you, Robert. You can take the rest of the day off. I won't be needing the car again today." As Robert drove away, Marcus stood in his driveway for a moment, really looking at his home for what felt like the first time in years. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the perfectly maintained lawn, and he could hear the distant sound of children playing in a neighboring yard. It was only 2:30 in the afternoon. Sarah wouldn't be expecting him home for at least 6 hours. She had mentioned something about having lunch with her book club, followed by a charity planning meeting at the country club. Their lives had become so scheduled, so compartmentalized, that they rarely surprised each other anymore. Marcus decided not to call ahead. Maybe a surprise homecoming would be good for both of them. Maybe they could talk about his diagnosis together, figure out how to navigate this new reality as a team. He used his key to enter through the front door, stepping into the grand foyer with its crystal chandelier and marble staircase. The house was quiet, which wasn't unusual for a Tuesday afternoon. Their housekeeper, Maria, only came on Mondays and Fridays, and their chef didn't arrive until 4 o'clock to prepare dinner. Marcus loosened his tie and walked toward the kitchen, thinking he might make himself a cup of coffee. The simple act of brewing his own coffee suddenly seemed appealing, a small step toward the lifestyle changes Dr. Mitchell had recommended. But, as he passed the living room, he heard something that made him stop. It was Sarah's voice, but she wasn't alone. There was another voice, a man's voice, and they were speaking in low, intimate tones. Marcus felt his heart begin to race, but this time it wasn't from anxiety about his health. A different kind of fear crept into his chest as he moved closer to the sound, careful to keep his footsteps silent on the hardwood floor. The voices were coming from Sarah's private study, a room she had decorated herself with antique furniture and family photographs. It was her sanctuary, the place where she handled their social calendar, managed her charity work, and kept her personal belongings. Marcus had always respected her privacy in that space. In 20 years of marriage, he had rarely entered the study without invitation. But now, hearing the unfamiliar male voice mixed with his wife's laughter, he felt compelled to understand what was happening. He approached the partially open door and peered through the gap. What he saw made his blood run cold. Sarah was seated on her antique settee, but she wasn't alone. Beside her sat a man Marcus didn't recognize, someone younger, perhaps in his early 30s, with dark hair and an expensive suit. They were sitting close together, closer than two people would sit if they were having a business meeting or casual conversation. But it was what he saw next that truly stunned him. The man had his hand on Sarah's knee, and she was leaning into him with a familiarity that spoke of intimacy. On the coffee table in front of them were architectural drawings and what appeared to be legal documents. Sarah was pointing to something on the papers while the man nodded and smiled. Marcus strained to hear their conversation without revealing his presence. "The timeline is perfect," Sarah was saying. "He's so focused on his business deals that he hasn't noticed any of the preparations. By the time everything is finalized, it will be too late for him to stop it." The man laughed softly. "You've been planning this for months. I have to admire your patience." 20 years of patience, Sarah replied, her voice carrying a bitter edge that Marcus had never heard before. 20 years of playing the perfect wife while he built his empire and forgot I existed. Well, now it's my turn. Marcus felt the world spinning around him. The health scare from Dr. Mitchell suddenly seemed insignificant compared to what he was witnessing. His wife, the woman he had loved and trusted for 2 decades, was clearly planning something behind his back, and it involved another man. He wanted to burst through the door and demand an explanation, but something held him back. Perhaps it was the shock of the moment, or maybe some survival instinct told him to learn more before confronting the situation. Either way, he remained hidden, listening to his life unravel through a crack in the door. "Are you sure about the legal aspects?" the man was asking. "I don't want there to be any complications that could trace back to us." Sarah's smile was cold and calculating. "David, I've had the best lawyers in the city working on this for months. They think they're helping me plan a surprise renovation of our summer house in the Hamptons. They have no idea what we're really doing." David. The name meant nothing to Marcus, but clearly this man knew intimate details about Marcus's life, his business, and his assets. The architectural drawings on the table weren't for a summer house renovation, they were for something else entirely, something that involved legal documents and careful timing. Marcus felt sick as the pieces began to fall into place. Sarah wasn't planning a surprise for him, she was planning something against him. The question was, what exactly was she plotting, and how long had this been going on? "When do you think he'll find out?" David asked, moving his hand from Sarah's knee to her shoulder in a gesture that was definitely not professional. "Hopefully not until it's too late to matter," Sarah replied, leaning into his touch. "Marcus is brilliant when it comes to business, but he's been completely oblivious to everything happening in his personal life. He trusts me completely, which makes this so much easier." The casual way she spoke about betraying his trust hit Marcus like a physical blow. He had trusted her completely. Through all the long hours at the office, all the business trips and late-night meetings, he had never once questioned Sarah's loyalty or faithfulness. She had been his anchor, the stable foundation that allowed him to take risks and build his empire. Now he was discovering that his foundation was built on quicksand. "What about the timeline for the Cayman accounts?" David asked, shuffling through the papers. "Everything will be transferred by the end of the month," Sarah replied. "The beauty of this plan is that he'll never see it coming. By the time Marcus realizes what's happening, we'll be long gone, and there won't be anything he can do about it." Marcus gripped the doorframe to steady himself. Cayman accounts. Transfers. They weren't just having an affair, they were stealing from him. Sarah, the woman who had access to all his financial information, who knew his business inside and out, was using that knowledge to rob him blind. The irony wasn't lost on him. On the same day he had learned that his health might be failing, he was discovering that his marriage and his financial security were also in jeopardy. It was as if the universe had decided to tear down everything he had built in a single afternoon. "I should go," David said, glancing at his watch. "The last thing we need is for him to come home early and find us together." Sarah laughed, but there was no warmth in the sound. "Marcus hasn't come home early once in the past 5 years. His completely predictable office until 7, dinner meetings until 10, home by 11. I could probably rob a bank in our living room at 3 in the afternoon, and he'd never know." As David gathered the papers from the coffee table, Sarah walked him toward the door of her study. Marcus quickly moved away from his listening post and ducked into the formal dining room, his heart pounding as he heard their footsteps in the hallway. "I'll call you tonight after he goes to sleep," Sarah was saying. "We need to finalize the arrangements for Friday." "Friday?" David's voice was moving toward the front door. "Are you sure you're ready?" "I've never been more ready for anything in my life," Sarah replied firmly. 20 years is long enough to waste on someone who sees me as nothing more than an accessory to his success." The front door opened and closed, and Marcus heard Sarah's footsteps returning toward her study. He remained hidden in the dining room, trying to process everything he had just learned. His wife was having an affair. She was stealing his money. And she was planning to leave him by Friday, just 3 days away. The woman he had loved and trusted for 20 years had been living a double life, carefully planning his destruction while playing the role of the devoted wife. Marcus thought about all the times Sarah had encouraged him to work late, all the business trips she had insisted he take, all the social events she had attended without him because he was too busy with work. He had thought she was being understanding and supportive. Now he realized she had been clearing the way for her secret meetings with David. As he sat in his dining room, surrounded by the expensive furniture and artwork they had chosen together, Marcus felt a strange sense of clarity washing over him. The health scare that had sent him home early today suddenly seemed like a blessing in disguise. If he hadn't left work early, he might never have discovered Sarah's betrayal until it was too late. He heard Sarah's voice from the study, apparently making a phone call. Her tone was businesslike and efficient, completely different from the intimate way she had been speaking with David. "Yes, I'd like to confirm my appointment for Thursday morning," she was saying. "The final signature review? Perfect. And you're certain there won't be any complications with the transfer?" Marcus realized he had a choice to make. He could confront S. Marcus spent the next 2 hours in his home office, a space Sarah rarely entered because she claimed it smelled like leather and cigars. Ironically, it was now the only place in his house where he felt truly safe from her deception. He sat behind his mahogany desk, staring at his computer screen, but his mind wasn't on emails or business reports. Instead, he was trying to piece together the puzzle of his wife's betrayal. 20 years of marriage. 2 decades of shared experiences, joint financial decisions, and intimate conversations about their future together. How had he missed the signs that Sarah was unhappy enough to plan such an elaborate scheme against him? Marcus opened his laptop and began searching through their joint financial accounts. As the primary breadwinner, he had always handled the major investments and business finances, but Sarah had complete access to their personal accounts. She managed their household expenses, charitable contributions, and social activities. He had trusted her judgment completely, rarely questioning her spending or financial decisions. Now, as he scrolled through months of bank statements, Marcus began to see patterns he had previously ignored. Small transfers to accounts he didn't recognize. Payments to law firms he had never heard of. Charges for services that seemed unnecessary or excessive. Individually, these transactions were insignificant compared to their overall wealth. But, together, they painted a picture of careful planning and systematic deception. One name appeared repeatedly in the transaction history: Mitchell and Associates Legal Services. Marcus had never heard of this firm, which was surprising since he knew most of the prominent lawyers in the city. A quick internet search revealed that Mitchell and Associates specialized in divorce law and asset protection. Their website boasted about their expertise in complex marital dissolution cases involving high-net-worth individuals. The pieces were falling into place, and the picture wasn't pretty. Sarah wasn't just having an affair with David, she was preparing to divorce him and take as much of his fortune as possible in the process. Marcus leaned back in his leather chair, feeling a mixture of anger, hurt, and grudging admiration for Sarah's thorough planning. She had spent months, possibly years, setting up this elaborate scheme. She had consulted lawyers, arranged financial transfers, and developed a relationship with David that appeared both personal and professional. The question that troubled Marcus most wasn't what Sarah was planning, that was becoming increasingly clear. The question was why she felt the need to be so deceptive about it. If she was unhappy in their marriage, why hadn't she simply asked for a divorce? Why the elaborate conspiracy and financial maneuvering? His phone buzzed with a text message from Sarah: "Having dinner with the charity committee tonight. We'll be home late. Don't wait up." Marcus stared at the message, wondering if she was really with a charity committee or if she was meeting with David to finalize their plans. The casual tone of the text, so normal and domestic, felt surreal given what he now knew about her secret life. He typed back, "No problem. Working late myself tonight." It wasn't entirely a lie. He was working, just not on the kind of business Sarah expected. Marcus opened a new browser window and began researching his options. If Sarah was planning to blindside him with divorce papers and asset seizures, he needed to understand his legal position. He also needed to know more about David and his role in Sarah's scheme. The man's full name was likely David Mitchell, which would explain the connection to Mitchell and Associates Legal Services. A quick search revealed that David Mitchell was indeed a partner at the firm, specializing in complex divorce cases. His professional biography mentioned his success in protecting clients' interests in high-stakes marital disputes. Marcus studied David's photograph on the law firm's website. He was younger than Marcus, perhaps 35 years old, with the kind of polished good looks that suggested expensive grooming and regular gym sessions. His bio mentioned that he had graduated from Columbia Law School and previously worked for a prestigious Manhattan firm that handled celebrity divorces. The irony was bitter. Sarah had chosen not just any lawyer, but one who specialized in taking down wealthy husbands. David wasn't just her affair partner, he was her weapon. As the evening wore on, Marcus found himself thinking about the early years of his marriage to Sarah. They had met at a charity fundraiser when she was 23 and working as an event coordinator for a non-profit organization. Marcus had been 25, just starting to build his investment firm, working 18-hour days and living in a tiny apartment in Queens. Sarah had been beautiful, intelligent, and ambitious. She came from a middle-class family in Connecticut and dreamed of a life filled with travel, culture, and social impact. Marcus had been immediately attracted to her combination of sophistication and warmth, her ability to navigate both charity galas and corner diners with equal grace. In those early days, they had been partners in the truest sense. Sarah had encouraged his business ambitions while pursuing her own career in non-profit management. They had spent countless nights talking about their dreams, planning their future together, supporting each other through the inevitable challenges of building their careers. When had that partnership turned into the master-servant relationship Sarah seemed to resent so deeply? Marcus tried to pinpoint the moment when their marriage had begun to deteriorate. Was it when his business took off and he started working longer hours? Was it when they moved to the Beacon Hills mansion and their lives became more formal and scheduled? Was it when they decided to postpone having children because his career was at a critical juncture? Or had Sarah been dissatisfied all along, simply hiding her true feelings while waiting for the right moment to strike? Around 9 o'clock, Marcus heard a car in the driveway. He quickly closed his laptop and moved to the window, watching as Sarah's BMW pulled into the garage. She was alone, which suggested that if she had been with David, they had met somewhere else. Marcus positioned himself in his office so he could hear Sarah's movements through the house. He listened as she disarmed the security system, kicked off her heels in the foyer, and walked toward the kitchen. Her routine was as predictable as his own. She would pour herself a glass of wine, check her phone for messages, and then come upstairs to change into her pajamas. Tonight, however, there was an additional sound, the quiet beeping of Sarah making a phone call. Marcus crept to the top of the stairs, staying in the shadows where he couldn't be seen but could hear her conversation. "It's me," Sarah said in a low voice. "Yes, he's here, but he's locked in his office as usual. We can talk freely." There was a pause while the person on the other end responded. Thursday morning at 10 o'clock, Sarah continued. "I'll sign the final papers, and then we can proceed with Friday's plan. Are you sure the timing will work?" Another pause. "Good. And, David, I want you to know how much I appreciate everything you've done for me. This couldn't have happened without your expertise." The way she said David's name was different from how she had spoken to him during their afternoon meeting. There was genuine affection in her voice, an intimacy that went beyond professional collaboration. "I love you too," Sarah said softly. "Just 2 more days, and then we can start our life together." Marcus felt his heart sink even further. It was one thing to discover that his wife was planning to divorce him and take his money. It was another thing entirely to hear her profess love for another man while standing in the kitchen of the home they had shared for years. "Yes, I've been thinking about the Cayman house," Sarah continued. "It will be perfect for us. Private, beautiful, and completely beyond Marcus's reach once the transfers are complete." The Cayman house. Marcus had never heard of any property in the Cayman Islands, but apparently Sarah and David had already purchased a love nest with his money. "I should go," Sarah said. "He might come downstairs for a late-night snack, and I don't want him to overhear anything. I'll see you tomorrow morning to review the final details." Marcus quickly returned to his office, making sure to close the door loudly enough for Sarah to hear. A few minutes later, he heard her footsteps on the stairs. "Marcus," she called out. "Are you still working?" "Just finishing up some reports," he called back, trying to keep his voice normal. "How was the charity committee meeting?" "Oh, you know how those things are," Sarah replied from the hallway. "Lots of discussion about fundraising strategies and event planning. Nothing too exciting." The casual lie rolled off her tongue so smoothly that Marcus wondered how many other deceptions he had failed to notice over the years. "I'm going to take a bath and go to bed," Sarah continued. "Don't stay up too late." "I won't," Marcus replied. "Good night." "Good night, darling." The endearment that had once felt natural and loving now sounded like mockery. How could she call him darling while planning to destroy his life? Marcus waited until he heard the bath water running in their master bathroom before opening his laptop again. He had work to do, and only 2 days to do it. First, he needed to secure his assets before Sarah could complete whatever transfers she had planned. Second, he needed to document her betrayal in a way that would protect him legally. And third, he needed to figure out exactly what she was planning for Friday so he could be prepared. Marcus opened his secure email and sent a message to his personal attorney, Jonathan Reeves. Jonathan was a Harvard-trained lawyer who specialized in corporate law and had handled all of Marcus's major business deals. More importantly, he was someone Marcus trusted completely. "Jonathan," he wrote, "I need to see you first thing tomorrow morning. It's urgent and personal. Please clear your schedule for a private consultation." Next, Marcus called his head of security, a former FBI agent named Tom Bradley who handled protection for Marcus's business operations and, occasionally, his personal security as well. "Tom, it's Marcus," he said quietly into the phone. "I need some discreet surveillance work done. Can you meet me at my office at 7 tomorrow morning?" "Of course, Mr. Wellington." "Is there a security threat I should know about?" "Yes," Marcus replied. "But it's not the kind you might expect." After ending the call, Marcus spent another hour reviewing his financial accounts and business holdings. Sarah had access to their joint personal accounts, but she didn't have any legal claim to his business assets or the investments he had made before their marriage. However, 20 years of marriage in New York State meant she would be entitled to a significant portion of his wealth if she filed for divorce. The key question was whether her elaborate planning gave her any legal advantages beyond the standard divorce settlement. If she had been moving money to hidden accounts or setting up offshore holdings, she might be trying to claim assets that would normally remain his property. Marcus made a list of all the financial institutions, law firms, and service providers he had noticed in their account statements. Tomorrow, he would begin the process of protecting himself against Sarah's scheme. As he prepared for bed, Marcus caught sight of himself in the bathroom mirror. The man looking back at him seemed older than he had that morning, worn down by the emotional trauma of discovering his wife's betrayal. But there was also something else in his reflection, a steely determination that reminded him of his younger self, the ambitious young man who had built an empire through careful planning and strategic thinking. Sarah thought she had been patient, spending months or years planning her attack. But she had forgotten that Marcus Wellington had built his fortune by being smarter, more strategic, and more ruthless than his competitors. Wednesday morning arrived gray and drizzly, matching Marcus's mood as he sat across from his attorney, Jonathan Reeves, in the conference room of Reeves and Associates. The law firm occupied 3 floors of a prestigious Manhattan building, and Jonathan's corner office offered an impressive view of Central Park. Under normal circumstances, Marcus enjoyed these meetings with Jonathan, appreciating his sharp legal mind and straightforward approach to complex problems. Today, however, the conversation was more personal and painful than any business deal Marcus had ever negotiated. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly," Jonathan said, reviewing the notes he had taken during Marcus's explanation. "Your wife has been secretly planning to divorce you, she's having an affair with her divorce attorney, and they've been moving money to accounts you don't control." "That's the situation," Marcus confirmed. "And, according to what I overheard, they plan to execute their strategy on Friday, just 2 days from now." Jonathan leaned back in his leather chair, his expression serious. At 60 years old, he had handled countless high-stakes legal battles, but the combination of marital betrayal and financial fraud clearly troubled him. "Marcus, I have to ask, are you certain about what you saw and heard? I've known Sarah for years through your social functions, and this seems very out of character for her." "That's exactly what makes it so effective," Marcus replied bitterly. "She's been playing the role of the devoted wife while systematically planning my destruction. I have bank statements showing payments to Mitchell and Associates, transfers to accounts I've never seen before, and I heard her confessing her love to David Mitchell on the phone last night." Jonathan made additional notes, his expression growing more concerned. David Mitchell is a formidable opponent in divorce court. His firm has a reputation for being aggressive and thorough in asset recovery cases. If Sarah has been planning this with his guidance, she likely has a comprehensive strategy. "That's why I need your help," Marcus said. "I want to protect my assets, document her betrayal, and make sure she doesn't succeed in stealing money that belongs to my business or predates our marriage." Jonathan nodded thoughtfully. "The first priority is securing your business assets and any separate property. New York is an equitable distribution state, which means the court will divide marital property fairly, but not necessarily equally. Your business, if properly documented as separate property, should remain yours. However, any appreciation in value during the marriage could be subject to division." "What about the money she's already moved?" "That's more complicated. If she's transferred marital funds without your knowledge or consent, that could constitute dissipation of marital assets, which could work in your favor. However, we need to document exactly what she's done and when." Marcus handed Jonathan a folder containing bank statements, transaction records, and notes from his investigation. "I've identified at least $50,000 in suspicious transfers over the past 6 months, plus legal fees and payments to services I never authorized." Jonathan reviewed the documents carefully. "This is good documentation, but we need more. I'm going to recommend that we hire a forensic accountant to trace these transactions and identify any hidden accounts. We also need to consider the possibility that Sarah has been planning this longer than 6 months." "How much longer?" "Given the sophistication of what you've described, possibly years. David Mitchell doesn't take cases he can't win, and this level of financial maneuvering suggests extensive preparation." The thought that Sarah might have been deceiving him for years rather than months made Marcus feel physically sick. How many conversations, intimacies, and shared decisions had been lies? How many times had she comforted him after difficult days at work while secretly planning to use his trust against him? "What's our strategy?" Marcus asked, forcing himself to focus on the practical aspects of his situation. Jonathan consulted his calendar. "If they are planning to serve you with divorce papers on Friday, we need to be proactive. I recommend that we file our own petition today, which will give us more control over the proceedings. We'll also request an immediate restraining order preventing either party from disposing of marital assets. Won't that tip her off that I know what she's planning?" "Possibly, but the alternative is letting her execute her plan while we play catch-up. In my experience, it's better to be aggressive early rather than defensive later." Marcus considered this advice. His business instincts told him that Jonathan was right. In any negotiation or conflict, the person who acted first usually had the advantage. But his emotional attachment to Sarah made him hesitate. Filing for divorce would make their separation real and final in a way that felt overwhelming. "Is there any possibility of salvaging our marriage?" Marcus asked quietly. Jonathan's expression softened with something approaching sympathy. "Marcus, I've been handling divorce cases for 30 years. When someone has planned deception at this level, involving financial fraud and an affair with another lawyer, reconciliation is extremely unlikely. Your wife isn't just unhappy, she's actively trying to harm you financially and legally." The brutal honesty of Jonathan's assessment was exactly what Marcus needed to hear. He had built his business success on making rational decisions based on facts, not emotions. This situation required the same approach. "File the papers," Marcus said decisively. "And let's get that restraining order in place as soon as possible." "Good." Now, there's one more issue we need to discuss. The timing of your discovery could actually work in our favor, but only if we handle it correctly. The fact that you came home early due to a medical consultation could be relevant to the court. Marcus had almost forgotten about his morning appointment with Dr. Mitchell in the chaos of discovering Sarah's betrayal. How is my health situation relevant? If Sarah has been planning to divorce you while you're dealing with a serious health issue, that could influence how the court views her conduct. It demonstrates a level of calculated cruelty that judges don't appreciate. My condition isn't life-threatening if properly managed, Marcus said. But it does require lifestyle changes and ongoing medical care. That's still relevant. Sarah's timing shows a lack of basic human decency that could impact the court's perception of her character. After finishing with Jonathan, Marcus drove to his office building for his 7 o'clock meeting with Tom Bradley. The Wellington Financial Tower was mostly empty at that early hour, giving Marcus a chance to think clearly without the usual distractions of phone calls, meetings, and urgent emails. Tom was waiting in the lobby, a tall, serious man in his 40s who had worked for the FBI's white-collar crime division before starting his security consulting firm. Marcus had hired him 3 years earlier after receiving some threatening letters from a disgruntled investor, and Tom had proven to be both professional and discreet. They rode the elevator to Marcus's office in silence, a precaution Tom always insisted upon in case of surveillance devices. Once they were behind the closed door of Marcus's private office, Tom activated a small electronic device that would detect any listening devices. "The office is clean," Tom reported. "Now, what kind of surveillance do you need?" Marcus explained the situation with Sarah, focusing on the practical aspects of her deception rather than the emotional impact. Tom listened without comment, occasionally taking notes in a small notebook. "You want documentation of her activities and meetings," Tom summarized when Marcus finished. "Photographic evidence of her relationship with David Mitchell, recordings of their conversations if legally permissible, and financial transaction records." "Exactly. But I don't want her to know she's being watched. If she realizes I'm onto her plan, she might accelerate her timeline or change her strategy." Tom nodded approvingly. "Smart approach. My team can provide discreet surveillance without alerting the subjects. However, there are legal limitations on what we can record and how we can obtain financial information." "I understand. Just get me whatever you can legally obtain. I'll need photographs of both subjects, their known addresses and vehicle information, and any schedule details you can provide." Marcus provided the requested information, including Sarah's daily routine and the little he knew about David Mitchell's law firm. Tom promised to have preliminary surveillance reports within 24 hours. The rest of Wednesday passed in a surreal mixture of normal business activities and secret preparation for the battle ahead. Marcus attended scheduled meetings, reviewed investment reports, and handled routine phone calls, all while his mind focused on the developing situation with Sarah. Around lunchtime, he received a text from Sarah, spa appointment this afternoon, then shopping with Jennifer. Home for dinner around 7. Marcus stared at the message, wondering if Sarah was really at a spa or if she was meeting with David to finalize their Friday plans. The casual normalcy of her communication felt like another betrayal. How could she send such domestic messages while planning to destroy their marriage? At 3 o'clock, Tom called with his first update. "Mrs. Wellington did go to a spa," he reported. "But she left after an hour and drove to the office building where David Mitchell works. She's been there for 2 hours, and our photographer has captured several images of them together in his office." "What kind of images?" "Professional consultation, but with obvious personal intimacy. Holding hands, him touching her shoulder, that sort of thing. Nothing explicitly romantic, but clearly more than attorney-client interaction." Marcus felt a familiar mixture of anger and hurt, but also satisfaction that his suspicions were being confirmed. "Keep watching. I need to know exactly what they are planning." "Understood. We'll maintain surveillance through Friday." That evening, Sarah arrived home exactly at 7 o'clock, as promised. She seemed relaxed and cheerful, chatting about her spa treatment and her shopping trip with her friend Jennifer. Her performance was so convincing that Marcus almost doubted what he had discovered over the past 2 days. But, during dinner, prepared by their chef Henri, Marcus watched Sarah more carefully than he had in years. He noticed small details that suddenly seemed significant: the way she avoided direct eye contact when discussing her day, how she deflected his questions about her afternoon activities, the nervous habit she had of twirling her wedding ring when she was lying. How long had she been exhibiting these signs of deception? How many lies had he missed because he was too busy or too trusting to pay attention? "Marcus," Sarah said during dessert, "I've been thinking that we should take a vacation soon. Maybe somewhere tropical, just the two of us." The suggestion was particularly cruel given what Marcus now knew about her plans. Was she trying to get him out of the country before Friday? Or was this simply another layer of her deception, making future plans she had no intention of keeping? "That sounds wonderful," Marcus replied, playing along with her charade. "Where were you thinking? Maybe the Caribbean? I've heard the Cayman Islands are beautiful this time of year." Marcus nearly choked on his wine. Sarah was actually suggesting they vacation in the same location where she and David had apparently purchased property with his money. The audacity was breathtaking. "The Cayman Islands do sound appealing," Marcus said carefully. "Have you been researching resorts there?" "Just browsing online," Sarah replied with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I thought it might be nice to find somewhere completely private and relaxing." After dinner, they watched a movie in their home theater, sitting side by side on the leather sofa where they had spent countless evenings over the years. Sarah cuddled against Marcus's shoulder, playing the role of the loving wife with Oscar-worthy performance skills. But Marcus could feel the distance between them now, an emotional chasm that her physical closeness couldn't bridge. Every touch felt calculated, every smile seemed false, every word of affection sounded like mockery. When Sarah excused herself to take a bath before bed, Marcus retreated to his office and called Tom Bradley. "Any updates from this afternoon?" "Yes, and you're not going to like it." After Mrs. Wellington left David Mitchell's office, they both drove to a bank downtown. Our photographer couldn't get inside, but they were there for over an hour with what appeared to be a banker and several legal documents. Marcus felt his stomach tighten. "Which bank?" "First International. It's one of the institutions that handles offshore banking and large asset transfers." The pieces were falling into place, and the pie Thursday morning dawned crisp and clear, a stark contrast to the previous day's gloom. Marcus woke early, as had become his habit, but instead of feeling the familiar weight of routine, he experienced something he hadn't felt in years: the electric anticipation of a high-stakes game where everything was on the line. Sarah was still sleeping beside him, her face peaceful and innocent in the morning light. Looking at her, Marcus felt a complex mixture of emotions. There was still love there, buried beneath layers of hurt and betrayal, but it was the kind of love one feels for someone who no longer exists. The Sarah he had married 20 years ago might have been real, but the woman lying next to him was a stranger wearing his wife's face. Marcus dressed quietly and left for his office earlier than usual. He had a full day ahead of him, and, according to Tom Bradley's surveillance reports, today was when Sarah would sign the final documents at Mitchell & Associates before executing whatever she had planned for Friday. His first stop was a breakfast meeting with the forensic accountant Jonathan had recommended. Elena Rodriguez was a former FBI financial crimes investigator who now worked as a private consultant specializing in complex asset tracing cases. She had reviewed the preliminary documents Marcus had provided and had some disturbing news. "Mr. Wellington," Elena said over coffee at a discreet restaurant near Marcus's office, "what your wife has done goes far beyond typical divorce planning. She's created a sophisticated financial structure designed to hide assets and make them difficult to recover." "How sophisticated are we talking about?" "Shell companies in 3 different countries, cryptocurrency transfers, and offshore accounts with banks that specialize in financial privacy. This isn't something she learned from watching YouTube videos. She's had professional help from experts who know how to move money beyond the reach of US courts." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. "How much money are we talking about?" "Based on the transaction patterns I've identified," at least $2 million has been moved over the past 18 months. But that's just what I can trace so far. There could be more. $2 million. It was a significant amount, though not devastating to Marcus's overall wealth. But the systematic nature of the theft was what truly shocked him. Sarah had been robbing him for 18 months, taking money bit by bit while playing the role of the loving wife. Can we recover it? Some of it, possibly. But it will require extensive legal action across multiple jurisdictions. Your wife and her attorney have made recovery as difficult and expensive as possible. Elena handed Marcus a detailed report outlining her findings. The document read like a thriller novel, complete with offshore shell companies, cryptocurrency wallets, and bank accounts in countries that didn't cooperate with U.S. law enforcement. There's one more thing you need to know, Elena said. The timing of these transfers accelerated significantly in the past month. Whatever they are planning for Friday, it's the final phase of a much larger operation. After his meeting with Elena, Marcus drove to his office feeling like he was seeing his life clearly for the first time in months. The late night Sarah had spent, working on charity events, the weekend trips to visit her sister in Connecticut, the mysterious phone calls she took in private, it all made sense now. She hadn't been living a double life, she had been living a completely fabricated life while systematically dismantling their marriage from the inside. Tom Bradley called at 10 o'clock with an update that confirmed Marcus's worst fears. Mrs. Wellington arrived at Mitchell & Associates at 9:30 this morning with a briefcase full of documents, Tom reported. Our photographer captured images of her entering the building, and we've confirmed that David Mitchell cleared his calendar for the entire morning. Any idea what documents she brought? We couldn't get close enough to see specifics, but based on the size of the briefcase and the fact that she brought her own materials rather than reviewing theirs, I guess these are final signature documents for whatever they've been planning. Marcus thanked Tom and hung up, then called Jonathan to update him on Elena's findings and the morning's surveillance report. This is bigger than we initially thought, Jonathan said after reviewing Elena's report. Your wife hasn't just been planning a divorce, she's been conducting a systematic asset theft operation with the help of a lawyer who specializes in exactly this kind of case. What are our options? We're filing an emergency motion this afternoon for a restraining order that will freeze all joint accounts and prevent any further asset transfers. We're also going to request an expedited hearing based on evidence of ongoing financial fraud. Will that stop whatever they are planning for tomorrow? It should, but only if we can serve the papers before they execute their plan. The question is whether we can move fast enough. Jonathan's words echoed in Marcus's mind as he tried to focus on his regular business responsibilities. He had 2 important client meetings scheduled for the afternoon, but he found it nearly impossible to concentrate on investment strategies and market analysis when his personal life was collapsing around him. At lunchtime, Marcus made a decision that surprised even himself. Instead of eating at his usual restaurant, he drove to the coffee shop across the street from Mitchell & Associates law firm. He wanted to see Sarah and David together, to witness firsthand the betrayal that was destroying his life. He didn't have to wait long. At 12:30, Sarah and David emerged from the building together. Marcus watched from his car as they walked to a nearby restaurant, holding hands like lovers without a care in the world. David was taller than Marcus had realized from the surveillance photos, with a kind of confident posture that suggested someone accustomed to winning. Sarah looked radiant, happier than Marcus had seen her in years. She was animated in her conversation with David, laughing and gesturing expressively. This was a woman in love, excited about her future, completely free from the guilt or anxiety that should have accompanied someone planning to destroy her husband's life. Marcus sat in his car for nearly an hour, watching them through the restaurant window. They reviewed documents over lunch, occasionally leaning close together to examine specific pages. David would point to certain sections while Sarah nodded and made notes. It was clearly a business meeting, but the constant physical contact and intimate body language made it equally clear that their relationship went far beyond professional collaboration. At one point, David took Sarah's hand and kissed it gently, a gesture so romantic and tender that Marcus felt physically ill. This wasn't just an affair of convenience or a marriage of mutual benefit. These two people genuinely cared for each other, which somehow made their betrayal even more painful. When they finally left the restaurant, Sarah and David embraced on the sidewalk before separating to their respective cars. The embrace lasted longer than necessary, and Marcus could see David whispering something in Sarah's ear that made her smile and blush like a teenager. As Marcus drove back to his office, he realized that watching Sarah with David had clarified something important for him. This wasn't a marriage that could be saved or a misunderstanding that could be resolved through counseling. Sarah had found someone else, someone who made her genuinely happy in a way that Marcus apparently never had. The rational part of his mind understood that marriages sometimes ended, that people grew apart and found love elsewhere. But the systematic deception and financial theft transformed a personal tragedy into something much more serious. Sarah wasn't just leaving him for another man, she was trying to destroy him in the process. His phone buzzed with a text from Sarah, "Meeting ran late. Going shopping with mother this afternoon. See you at dinner." Marcus stared at the message, wondering if Sarah was actually shopping with her mother or if she was spending the afternoon with David, celebrating the successful completion of their morning's business. The lies came so easily to her now that Marcus wondered if she even remembered what the truth looked like. At 3 o'clock, Jonathan called with news that was both encouraging and terrifying. "We've filed all the papers, and the judge has agreed to an emergency hearing tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. We'll be requesting immediate asset freezes and full financial disclosure. However, there's a problem." "What kind of problem?" "David Mitchell's firm has also filed divorce papers naming you as the respondent. They are seeking immediate temporary support payments and asset preservation orders." Marcus felt the world tilting around him. "They filed first?" "By about 2 hours. It appears they executed their plan earlier than expected, probably because they completed their preparation ahead of schedule." The news hit Marcus like a physical blow. Despite all his planning and preparation, Sarah and David had managed to strike first. They would go into tomorrow's hearing as the plaintiffs, putting Marcus in the defensive position he had hoped to avoid. "What does this mean for our strategy?" "It means we're playing their game now instead of our own. However, Elena's financial investigation gives us strong evidence of asset dissipation that could work in our favor. The judge will want to understand where $2 million went and why it was moved without your knowledge." After ending the call with Jonathan, Marcus sat in his office staring out at the Manhattan skyline. In the span of 3 days, his life had been completely turned upside down. He had gone from being a successful businessman with a stable marriage to being a defendant in a divorce case involving allegations of financial fraud. But Marcus Wellington hadn't built an empire by giving up when things got difficult. If Sarah wanted to play hardball, he was prepared to show her exactly how the game was really played. He called Tom Bradley one final time. "Tom, I need you to be in that courtroom tomorrow morning with every piece of evidence you've gathered. Photographs, surveillance reports, financial transaction records, everything. Already planned on it. I've also prepared a timeline of their meetings and financial activities that should be helpful to your attorney." "Good. And, Tom? After tomorrow's hearing, I want you to expand your investigation. I want to know everything about David Mitchell, his finances, his other clients, his previous relationships, his professional history. If he's made any mistakes in planning this scheme, I want to find them." "Understood. Is there anything specific you're looking for?" Marcus thought about the confident way David had kissed Sarah's hand, the casual arrogance in his posture, the expensive suit and luxury watch he wore. David Mitchell struck him as a man who believed he was smarter than everyone else, and, in Marcus's experience, that kind of arrogance usually led to careless mistakes. "Look for patterns," Marcus said. "This level of financial manipulation suggests David has done this before. If he has a history of helping clients hide assets or manipulating divorce proceedings, I want to know about it. I'll have a preliminary report on Mitchell within 48 hours." As the afternoon wore on, Marcus found himself thinking about the early years of his marriage to Sarah. Had there been signs of her capacity for deception that he had missed? Had her loyalty and support during his business-building years been genuine, or had she always been calculating the best way to maximize her eventual payout? The questions were painful and, ultimately, unanswerable. What mattered now was protecting himself and his business from further damage while navigating the legal battle that lay ahead. At 6 o'clock, Marcus left his office and drove home to face Sarah one last time as his wife. Tomorrow, after the court hearing, they would be adversaries in a legal proceeding. Tonight was their final evening together in the house they had shared for years, surrounded by the furniture they had chosen together and the artwork that reflected their shared tastes and memories. Sarah was in the kitchen when he arrived, humming while she prepared a salad to accompany the dinner Henri had left for them. She looked beautiful and relaxed, every inch the devoted wife preparing a meal for her hard-working husband. "How was your day?" she asked brightly as Marcus poured himself a scotch. "Productive," Marcus replied, studying her face for any sign of guilt or anxiety about the divorce papers she had filed that afternoon. There was nothing. Sarah's performance was flawless, her concern for his well-being apparently genuine, her affection seemingly real. If Marcus didn't know better, he would have believed that this was simply another ordinary evening in their 20-year marriage. "I've been thinking more about that vacation we discussed," Sarah continued, tossing the salad with practiced efficiency. "Maybe we should plan something for next month. You've been working so hard lately, and I think we both could use some time together away from all the stress." Next month. By next month, they would be embroiled in divorce proceedings, their assets would be frozen by court order, and David Mitchell would probably be living in the Cayman Islands house that Sarah had purchased with Marcus's money. "That sounds wonderful," Marcus replied, playing along with her charade. "Let's definitely plan something special." As they sat down to dinner together, Marcus realized that this might be the last normal conversation they would ever have. Tomorrow would bring lawyers, judges, accusations, and evidence. Their marriage would become a legal case, their relationship reduced to financial statements and witness testimony. But tonight, for a few more hours, they were still husband and wife, sharing a meal in their beautiful home, talking about their day and making plans for a future they both knew would never happen. Marcus raised his glass of wine in a toast. Friday morning arrived with the weight of inevitability. Marcus woke before dawn, his mind already sharp and focused despite having slept only intermittently. Beside him, Sarah was still sleeping peacefully, her face serene and untroubled. In a few hours, they would be sitting on opposite sides of a courtroom, but, for now, she looked like the woman he had fallen in love with 20 years ago. Marcus dressed in his finest charcoal suit, the one Sarah had helped him choose for important business presentations. The irony wasn't lost on him, he was wearing her selection of armor into a battle against her. As he adjusted his tie in the bathroom mirror, Marcus caught sight of his own reflection. The man looking back at him appeared older, more weathered than he had just a week ago, but there was also a steely determination in his eyes that he recognized from his most challenging business negotiations. Sarah stirred as he prepared to leave. "You up early?" she murmured sleepily, glancing at the clock. "It's barely 6 o'clock. Important meeting today," Marcus replied, which was certainly true, though not in the way Sarah would interpret it. "I'll probably still be sleeping when you get home tonight," Sarah said, stretching languidly. "I'm having dinner with my mother, and you know how late those evenings run." Marcus nodded, wondering if Sarah was really planning dinner with her mother or if she was celebrating her anticipated victory with David Mitchell. Either way, he suspected she was right, she would be asleep when he returned home, though the house might feel very different by then. "Have a good day," Marcus said softly, leaning down to kiss her forehead one final time. "You too, darling," Sarah replied, already drifting back toward sleep. As Marcus drove through the quiet streets toward downtown Manhattan, he reflected on the strange ritual they had just performed. Both of them had spoken words of affection while knowing that this was goodbye to their marriage, their shared life, and any pretense of caring for each other. It had been a funeral disguised as an ordinary mourning. The courthouse was an imposing granite building that had witnessed thousands of similar dramas over the decades. Marcus arrived early, wanting to compose himself and review his strategy with Jonathan before facing Sarah and her legal team. Jonathan was already waiting in the lobby, accompanied by Elena Rodriguez and a younger associate who would help manage the extensive documentation they had prepared. Tom Bradley stood nearby in a dark suit, looking every inch the professional investigator rather than the security consultant Marcus was accustomed to seeing. "Are you ready for this?" Jonathan asked as they walked toward the elevator. "As ready as anyone can be to watch their marriage explode in public," Marcus replied. "Remember, the key today is documentation and evidence. Sarah and David are going to present themselves as the injured parties, but we have proof of systematic deception and asset manipulation. Let the facts speak for themselves." The courtroom was smaller than Marcus had expected, with wooden benches that reminded him of a church rather than a legal battlefield. Judge Margaret Walsh presided from an elevated bench, her grey hair pulled back severely and her expression suggesting someone who had seen every possible variation of human duplicity during her 30 years on the bench. Sarah arrived 15 minutes later with David Mitchell and 2 other attorneys from his firm. Marcus watched as she entered the courtroom, noting that she had chosen a conservative navy dress that made her appear younger and more vulnerable. Her makeup was subtle, her jewelry minimal, and her overall appearance calculated to generate sympathy from the judge. When Sarah's eyes met Marcus's across the courtroom, he searched her face for any sign of guilt, regret, or even acknowledgement of what she had done. Instead, he saw something that chilled him to the bone, cold calculation mixed with what appeared to be genuine contempt. This wasn't a woman who felt bad about betraying her husband. This was a woman who believed Marcus deserved everything that was happening to him. David Mitchell stood to present Sarah's case first, his voice confident and his manner suggesting complete certainty in his position. He painted a picture of a devoted wife who had been neglected and emotionally abandoned by a workaholic husband who valued money more than relationships. "Your Honor," David said, his tone perfectly modulated for maximum effect, "Mrs. Wellington has spent 20 years supporting her husband's business ambitions while receiving nothing in return but increasing isolation and emotional neglect. She seeks only what is fair and reasonable, a modest settlement that will allow her to rebuild her life after 2 decades of sacrificing her own dreams for his success." Marcus listened to this fictional account of their marriage with growing amazement. David made Sarah sound like a victim of domestic abuse rather than a woman who had systematically stolen millions of dollars while planning to abandon her husband during a health crisis. "Mrs. Wellington has made no unreasonable demands," David continued. "She seeks temporary support of $20,000 per month, the house in the Hamptons, and 50% of marital assets acquired during their 20-year marriage. Given Mr. Wellington's substantial income and assets, these requests are modest and appropriate." When it was Jonathan's turn to respond, the tone in the courtroom shifted dramatically. "Your Honor," Jonathan began, his voice carrying the authority of someone presenting irrefutable facts rather than emotional appeals, "what Mr. Mitchell has failed to mention is that his client has been systematically stealing from her husband for at least 18 months while conducting an extramarital affair with her own attorney." The words hung in the air like an explosion. Sarah's face went white, while David Mitchell's confident expression faltered for the first time. Jonathan continued methodically, presenting Elena's financial investigation, Tom's surveillance evidence, and the documented timeline of Sarah's deception. Bank records showed the pattern of unauthorized transfers, photographs demonstrated the intimate relationship between Sarah and David, and communication records revealed the elaborate planning that had gone into their scheme. "Mrs. Wellington didn't just plan to leave her husband," Jonathan said, his voice growing stronger as he outlined the evidence. "She planned to rob him. Shell companies in 3 countries, cryptocurrency transfers, offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. This isn't a woman seeking a fair divorce settlement. This is a woman conducting a sophisticated financial crime with the help of her attorney and lover." Judge Walsh examined the evidence carefully, her expression growing increasingly stern as she reviewed Elena's financial analysis and Tom's surveillance reports. The photographs of Sarah and David together were particularly damaging, intimate moments captured outside restaurants, holding hands on city sidewalks, embracing outside David's apartment building. "Mr. Mitchell," Judge Walsh said finally, her voice carrying a sharp edge, "are you prepared to address these allegations of asset dissipation and conflict of interest?" David Mitchell stood slowly, and, for the first time, Marcus saw uncertainty in his posture. The confident attorney who had opened the hearing with such authority now seemed to be scrambling for a response. "Your Honor," My client's personal relationships are not relevant to the equitable distribution of marital assets. As for the financial transfers, Mrs. Wellington was simply protecting assets that she reasonably believed would be hidden or disposed of by her husband. It was a weak response, and Judge Walsh's expression suggested she found it unsatisfactory. Mr. Mitchell, you are both Mrs. Wellington's attorney and her romantic partner, which creates a significant conflict of interest. Additionally, the evidence suggests that you may have assisted in moving marital assets beyond the reach of this court. I'm ordering an immediate investigation into your professional conduct, and I'm appointing a special master to trace all financial transactions made by either party in the past 24 months. Sarah spoke for the first time, her voice tight with barely controlled panic. Your Honor, I can explain the financial arrangements. I was protecting our assets from my husband's risky business investments. I never intended to harm him financially. Judge Walsh looked at Sarah with the kind of expression reserved for particularly untruthful defendants. Mrs. Wellington, the evidence suggests that you've been moving money to accounts in the Cayman Islands while conducting an affair with your attorney. This court does not look favorably on deception, particularly when it involves potential criminal activity. The hearing continued for another 2 hours, with Marcus watching as Sarah and David's carefully constructed strategy collapsed under the weight of documented evidence. Jonathan methodically destroyed their financial claims while Tom's surveillance reports demonstrated the calculated nature of their relationship. By noon, Judge Walsh had issued a series of orders that effectively dismantled everything Sarah and David had worked to achieve. All joint accounts were frozen immediately, preventing any further asset transfers. Sarah was ordered to provide complete financial disclosure, including the location and control of all offshore accounts. David Mitchell was suspended from representing Sarah pending an investigation into his professional conduct and potential criminal liability. Most significantly, the judge appointed an independent attorney to represent Sarah's interests while ordering a complete forensic audit of all financial transactions during the marriage. This court will not tolerate systematic deception or asset manipulation, Judge Walsh declared. Both parties will comply with all disclosure orders, and any attempt to hide or transfer additional assets will result in contempt charges and potential criminal prosecution. As they left the courthouse, Marcus felt a complex mixture of emotions. Relief that Sarah's scheme had been exposed and stopped. Satisfaction that his careful planning and documentation had protected his interests. But also profound sadness that 20 years of marriage had ended in such a public and humiliating manner. Sarah walked past Marcus on the courthouse steps without acknowledging his presence. Her face was pale and drawn, her confident composure completely shattered. David Mitchell accompanied her to a waiting taxi, but even their body language suggested that the romantic partnership was already fracturing under the weight of legal and professional consequences. Tom Bradley appeared at Marcus's side as they watched the taxi disappear into traffic. What happens next? Marcus asked. The forensic audit will take several months, but, based on what we've already documented, Mrs. Wellington will likely face criminal charges for asset manipulation and, possibly fraud, Tom replied. David Mitchell is looking at disbarment proceedings and potential criminal liability for his role in the scheme. Jonathan joined them, carrying his briefcase full of legal documents that had just dismantled Marcus's marriage. The immediate threat is over, Jonathan said. Your assets are protected, and Sarah won't be able to execute any additional transfers. However, recovering the money she's already moved will take time and extensive legal action. As Marcus drove home that afternoon, he thought about the strange journey that had brought him to this point. 5 days ago, he had been a predictable businessman with a routine life and a stable marriage. A health scare had sent him home early, leading to the discovery that his wife was systematically betraying him. But now, as he turned into his driveway and looked at the mansion he had purchased to make Sarah happy, Marcus realized that discovering her betrayal might have been the best thing that could have happened to him. For years, he had been living a lie, married to a woman who viewed him as nothing more than a source of money and social status. The house felt different as he entered through the front door. Sarah's personal belongings were gone, moved out while they were in court that morning. The family photographs had been removed from their frames, leaving empty spaces on the mantelpieces and side tables. Even her favorite flowers had been taken from the vases, leaving the rooms feeling stark and unfamiliar. Marcus poured himself a scotch and walked out to the back terrace where he had stood just 5 days earlier, trying to process what he had discovered about his marriage. The garden looked the same, but everything else had changed completely. His phone buzzed with a message from Dr. Mitchell, reminding him about his follow-up appointment the next week. The health concerns that had seemed so frightening on Tuesday now felt manageable in comparison to everything else he had endured. As the sun set over the valley below his house, Marcus reflected on the lessons he had learned from his wife's betrayal. Success in business meant nothing if it came at the cost of personal relationships, but trust had to be earned and verified, not simply assumed. Sarah had taught him that even people you love completely are capable of systematic deception if the stakes are high enough. But she had also taught him something else, that he was stronger and more resilient than he had realized. The past week had tested every aspect of his character, his business judgment, his emotional stability, his ability to think strategically under pressure, and his capacity to fight for what belonged to him. Marcus had passed every test. His phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. The caller ID showed Elena Rodriguez's number. "Mr. Wellington, I have an update on our financial investigation. We've identified additional offshore accounts that Mrs. Wellington didn't disclose in court today. The total amount involved is closer to $4 million, not the $2 million we initially calculated." Marcus felt a familiar surge of anger, but it was tempered now by resignation. Sarah had stolen even more than he had realized, but the important thing was that her scheme had been stopped before she could complete it. "Can we recover it?" "Most of it, probably. It will take time and legal action in multiple countries, but the trail is clear now that we know what to look for." After ending the call, Marcus walked back into his house and climbed the stairs to his bedroom. Sarah's side of the walk-in closet was empty, her vanity cleared of perfumes and jewelry, her presence erased as completely as if she had never existed. But as Marcus changed out of his courtroom suit and into comfortable clothes, he realized that he wasn't mourning the end of his marriage as much as he was celebrating the end of his deception. For the first time in years, possibly decades, he knew exactly where he stood. His wife was gone, his assets were protected, and his future was his own to determine. It had been the most difficult week of Marcus Wellington's life, but it had also been the most clarifying. Coming home early on Tuesday had changed everything, revealing truths that might have remained hidden for years. Now, as Friday evening settled over his empty house, Marcus began planning for a future that was entirely his own. He had work to do, recovering his stolen money and rebuilding his life, but for the first time since Tuesday morning, he felt genuinely optimistic about what lay ahead. The man who had discovered his wife's betrayal was gone, replaced by someone stronger, wiser, and infinitely, to us, he said, looking directly into Sarah's eyes. "To us," Sarah replied, clinking her glass against his with a smile that broke his heart. They were both lying, and they both knew it, but somehow the ritual felt necessary. It was their goodbye to 20 years of marriage, wrapped in the fiction that they still cared for each other. Tomorrow, the masks would come off, and the real battle would begin. Q was getting darker by the hour. Sarah and David weren't just planning a divorce, they were planning to systematically strip Marcus's wealth before he could protect it. "Tom, I need you to expand surveillance to include David Mitchell's home and any other locations where they might meet. I also need you to document any additional visits to banks or law offices." "Already on it. We've identified Mitchell's apartment on the Upper East Side, and we're tracking both their vehicles. If they are planning something for Friday, we'll have advance warning." As Marcus prepared for bed, he reflected on how completely his life had changed in just 48 hours. Tuesday morning, he had been a successful businessman with a stable marriage and a predictable routine. Now he was essentially a spy in his own home, gathering evidence against his wife while preparing for a legal battle that would determine his financial future. But there was something else developing alongside his anger and hurt, a cold, strategic focus that he recognized from his most challenging business negotiations. Sarah and David had made a crucial error in their planning. They had underestimated their opponent. Marcus Wellington had built his empire by being smarter, more prepared, and more ruthless than his competition. Sarah was about to discover that her husband possessed all of those qualities in abundance. Tomorrow was Thursday, one day before Sarah's mysterious Friday deadline. Marcus intended to use those 24 hours to turn the tables on his wife's carefully planned betrayal. The game was just beginning, and Marcus was ready to play. She was about to be reminded of those qualities in a very personal way. Marcus climbed into bed beside his sleeping wife, careful not to wake her. Looking at her peaceful face, he felt a complex mixture of emotions: love for the woman she had once been, anger at her betrayal, and sadness for the marriage they were both about to lose. But underneath all those emotions was something Sarah hadn't anticipated: his competitive instinct. Marcus Wellington had never lost a fight that mattered to him. He wasn't about to start now. As he lay in the darkness, listening to Sarah's steady breathing, Marcus refined his strategy for the next 2 days. By Friday, when Sarah expected to execute her carefully planned destruction of his life, she would discover that her husband had been planning a strategy of his own. The student was about to become the teacher. Tomorrow, the real game would begin. Ara immediately, demanding explanations and hoping to salvage their marriage. He could call his own lawyers and try to protect his assets before Friday's mysterious deadline. Or he could do something completely unexpected. He could let Sarah think her plan was working while he developed a counter-strategy of his own. For the first time since Dr. Mitchell had called that morning, Marcus felt a spark of his old business instincts returning. He hadn't built a multi-million-dollar empire by being naive or trusting. He had succeeded because he was smart, strategic, and always one step ahead of his competition. Sarah had made one crucial mistake in her planning: she had underestimated him. She thought he was predictable, oblivious, and completely focused on work to the exclusion of everything else. In many ways, she was right, but she had forgotten that underneath the routine and predictability was a man who had built something from nothing through careful observation, strategic thinking, and the ability to outmaneuver his opponents. Marcus stood up quietly and made his way toward the back of the house, careful to avoid any areas where Sarah might see him. He needed time to think, to plan, and to figure out exactly what his wife was plotting before Friday arrived. As he stepped out onto the back terrace overlooking their pool and gardens, Marcus realized that coming home early today had been the most important decision he had made in years. Dr. Mitchell's health concerns had given him a wake-up call about his mortality, but discovering Sarah's betrayal had given him something even more valuable: the truth about his life. The question now was what he was going to do with that truth. Marcus looked out at the perfectly manicured landscape that Sarah had designed, thinking about how much time, money, and trust he had invested in building their life together. But as the afternoon sun began to sink lower in the sky, Marcus Wellington began to formulate a plan of his own. Sarah thought she was playing chess while he was playing checkers. She was about to discover just how wrong she was.